Okay, I'm now with Sabina, and luckily we're inside now, away from the rain, who's a fundraising officer for Girls United. Can you just tell us about today?
Yeah, sure. So today we have ran a fundraising 11-a-side football match, and we've got a networking event later to raise funds to make football accessible. The focus for us has been a lot of the programmes that we run across South London. Majority of girls are accessing those for discounted or even free. We currently have 385 girls accessing that for free or discounted memberships, and 97% of those girls are accessing it for free. So we're wanting to continue to make football accessible. We don't want any financial barriers to be in place for girls, whatever their background, to play football. So that's been the theme of today, yeah.
How long have you been involved with Girls United?
So this is actually my third week in the role, but I've known about Girls United kind of nearly ever since it started. I've kind of been familiar with the CEO and stuff back in uni. I've played football my whole life as well, and just been a supporter, I guess, before joining, so yeah.
What do you see as the main barriers to girls playing football?
I think the two main barriers, literally physical space to be able to play, whether that's access to pitch space, that's obviously kind of slightly saturated with boys having more access to girls, and there being financial barriers as well in place that we obviously see throughout all our programmes, and in terms of today's event, wanting to break down those barriers. I think in general there's societal attitudes that are in place that are changing, and there's been a massive shift in the women's game that is kind of trickling down to the grassroots, but fundamentally girls do not get the same opportunities as boys, and we're wanting to change that, and it should be normal for all girls to be able to try and play football and have the opportunity. Not every girl will maybe enjoy it or want to become the next Lessa Russo, but we're here to just make football accessible for all of those to try. So yeah.
And what locations are you focusing on at the moment in London?
So we primarily operate in Brixton area, Lambeth and Southwark councils mainly. We've got over 41 hours of coaching sessions done weekly. We are kind of broken down into 3 different programmes with a range of school training sessions that are delivered kind of at lunchtimes, then social football sessions in which, we've got a syllabus built around teaching girls life skills. It's so much more than just playing the sport and enjoying that, but actually growing in confidence and all those really, really important personal development aspects that football gives girls, and that I feels very personal to me, because having grown up playing football, I know how it shaped me as a person, and I know the impact it can have on your wider life, outside of the sport. So yeah, we have a range of, as I said, school, social, football kind of life skill programs, and then we also do have competitive club football teams that we're expanding at the moment. So yeah, quite a mix.
Within even that sort of quite a small location area you've got of South London, do you notice any disparities within certain areas even within that?
Yeah, I think the areas are all quite a mixture. It's kind of very dependent on where each session is held, but each location there are obvious kind of financial disparities that we see, and kind of a lot of different elements of diversity that we try to accommodate for girls accessing football. So financial kind of differences, I think, are one of the main kind of indicators. But yeah, that's what we found.
I mean, one, because I deal in North London, dealing in places in Hackney, and one of the issues there as well is transport. So if you're someone out in Essex or Surrey or someone like that, you normally the parent drives the kids to football and they come pick them up. Even if I go out to Highgate, they do that. But right in the city, it's not just the lack of facilities, the lack of being able to get to the facilities, even though, physically speaking, it's not that far away. Yeah. Do you notice that in South London at all? Yeah,
so I know that we've got a really nice community, and there are, parents who are able to drive their kids to sessions who then share those lifts with other girls who maybe their parents aren't able to, or there's a bit more of a journey. So there's definitely that community feel of kind of sharing and making sure girls can literally get to sessions and games. But I mean, primarily our programs are targeted at being central and in communities where the catchmate is kind of targeted, and girls they're not travelling far at all. But yeah.
So how about your own personal journey? How did you get involved in football, and where and what age, etc.? Okay,
so I remember playing football literally since 4 or 5. I've got an older brother who's football mad, so I think probably props to him a lot, wanting his younger sibling to play. So yeah, I played my whole life up in Liverpool. I remember always playing in the park with boys, always been mistaken for a boy. My brother always being, can my sister play? And then saying they're kind of reluctantly say yes, and he's like, she's good, and then just always getting the comment of like, oh, you're good for a girl, just from such a young age. But yeah, kind of shaking it off. But then going into more competitive football, 11-a-side, etc., and like it's just something I've not stopped doing.
So when did you start to get where you could just play with girls?
I think I must have been about 10, 11, joining like a local 11-a-side team. Like the league wasn't massive. Like I remember being 8, 9 and wanting to play competitively, but the teams just weren't there. Like there wasn't even a training session I could join. It was only really kind of like academy level and then nothing. So that being really frustrating, like there just not being any access. And I just had to play the part with my brother and my dad. So that was it really. And like just playing at school with the boys on the playground. So yeah, it would have been 10, 11 actually starting competitive football.
How do you think it's evolved since those days?
I think it's changed massively, and it's really lovely to see at the moment, thinking back to my experience, that there are a lot more opportunities for young girls to play, and particularly competitive football, which maybe is something which, when I grew up, was kind of like further down the line in terms of age. So it honestly feels like a different world, which sometimes makes me quite emotional, because like it's really lovely to see, obviously, but there's still like so much more to do. And I think like just trying to link the grassroots game with the professional development of the WSL and the success it's had, particularly over this last year. Like the professional game is nothing without the grassroots. No. Every single one of those players came to the grassroots. Yeah. And I think what we do at Girls United in particular is we are focused on grassroots football and wanting to elevate that and like, celebrate it, involving the whole game in general. Everything is interdependent on each other.
What areas do you think are the most important for improvement at the moment to help grow the women's game?
Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is probably male voices and having male allies. And I don't mean to say that to take away from the impact that female voices have, but I really do think that it literally would take a few male voices maybe putting their money where their mouth is and kind of taking a bit more of a stand to elevate the game in certain ways. It's obviously not completely dependent on that, but I just think like societal attitudes in general, particularly at a very young age, like sexism in sport, let alone just football and in general, is rooted at a very young age, 5, 6-year-olds in school. So I think like just making it normal and changing those attitudes. You know, kids learn things, and no kid is kind of born to think that women or girls can't play football. So I think like starting very young in those early years is also imperative.
Do you think like there needs to be a bit of education about, because the machoism of the men's game, do you think that sort of then slips into the women's game and the attitude towards the women's game? Do you think there needs to be more education when boys are younger necessarily?
How do you mean, sorry?
So boys should be taught a little bit more about, because you get them kind of machoism of the men's game, don't you? And it's, you know, like, you know, the adrenaline and all that stuff. Yeah. Do you think that sometimes impacts on how they view the women's game?
I think so, yeah. I think it's actually Women in Sport recently had a study on kind of like young boys' attitudes to girls in sport and football in schools, and basically their findings were that like young boys are the key to changing attitudes, and they are taught those attitudes from their parents, from their grandparents, uncles, aunties, etc. And I do think if they're taught the right attitudes and that girls can play football and can be just as good as boys a lot of the time, then things will start to change. But I definitely do think that it's like when you go to a WSL game or any women's game, that the atmosphere is so different to the men's game. It hasn't got that same rivalry, which I do think is needed, to be honest. Like you can still get behind your team and stuff, but yeah, there's a noticeable difference. Yeah, I think it's very complex, and I think that like there's so many factors intertwined that kind of affect just attitudes and the kind of success of the women's game and girls playing football. It's kind of not dependent on one thing, but I definitely think that's very key. Yeah.
Okay, and finally, how would you like to see the future of the women's game and your role in it?
I'd like to see it literally just being the norm that girls play football, and particularly like in schools. I think like that's where everything starts, and that's where you get your first opportunities to try different sports. I think it needs to be literally from 4 or 5 years old, football is given to girls to play as well at the same level as the boys, and that's not overlooked at all, right throughout as well. You know, it's always such an excuse with like, I remember being in school and wanting to start girls teams and there's not enough interest, so we're not going to do it. It was like, you need to give those opportunities in the first place. No one's just going to like think, oh, I might like football if they've never had the opportunity to try. So I'd like to see that being a given and with no hesitation. My role in it, I think I'd like to continue kind of like pushing for Girls United and like the role that we play in London in particular, Mexico, and kind of, I guess, really working with other people who are passionate about girls and women's football, but also just like female empowerment and empowerment that football and sport brings people on and off the pitch. So, yeah.
Well, it seems like Girls United are doing some great stuff, and I better let you go back and do some fundraising. So thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.